Welcome to Let's Make a Game Platformer, episode 29. In last episode, I've added the platform, as you can see here on the right. So, piece of terrain that can move in any direction and in any fashion you can define. However, the problem at the moment is that the whole definition of how it moves is in the prefab for this specific object. So let's take a look at this one. It specifies what's the timing of the move, how does it move, so what distance, x, y, and so on, but also what kind of interpolations it uses. And at the moment, the level it contains is putting this name of the prefab into the level. So if you wanted to have a different platform, for example, imagine one going in a up direction, for example, you would have to create a separate prefab for it at the moment. So what I'd like to do today is work a bit more on how the entities that are from the level and also from other places, like the other place where you have spawning entities when the bug with gun is shooting a projectile. And let's figure out how we can make it so that the actual entity that is spawned is based on the prefab, however, with some possible changes that are defined on the runtime or in the definition here in the file. So I will start using a class that is in the gaming module, which is called entity spawner, which allows us to specify a recipe. I'll show the recipe in a moment how it is, and also prefab name and changes. So first of all, let's take a look at where we are doing stuff from creating the entities from the level itself. It's done here. And we have this code which is done twice. So here and here. Wouldn't it be nice to be doing this once only? So let me maybe create here in the logic package. I'll already have a spawning one. Okay, so let's create something that will basically set up the location if we specify it. So let's go with create an interface first, platformer entity spawner, and we will have method here entity ref create entity at float x, float y, float z, string prefab name, and map string object changes. So let's go with this one first. So first, what I'd like to do is allow us to specify a separate platform here, saying, for example, 1, 1, 0, so above this current platform that's moving in a different direction. So I'd like to reuse the same prefab, however, say, oh, by the way, I wanted this guy to move in a slightly different direction, for example, y direction. So how I can do this is either use recipe, the way the entity spawner is here, and the recipe is basically in here. You are passing a JSON object, so which is similar to the definition of entity. For example, for the moving platform, I can say that I want to have this component modified. However, I have to escape it, and it's so on and so on. And in here, I want to specify that distance y is 2. So this is basically a recipe, how I can use a recipe. So let's maybe start off with this one. From recipe at string recipe. So let's go with this one first, and I'll create here a platformer entity spawner system, so the implementation of this class. I'll register the system, and profiles gameplay, and we will be sharing the platformer entity spawner here, and I'll implement platformer entity spawner. So we're going to say that this system exposes this interface to everything else in the context and is in the context gameplay. In here I will inject the entity spawner class, which does a lot of code that we don't have to do anymore. And I'll have an implement method here, entity from recipe, so I'll call the entity spawner here, spawn entity from recipe, pass the recipe here, and also do result create component location component, and I'll set the values of it to the whatever is passed to the method. And also, similarly as we did before in the level entity system, if it has this component, actually I can copy this. If it has this component, then I'll pass. If it has the base location component, I will modify it. Save changes and finally return result. Okay, so now I have to first of all enable the entity spawner by adding the active profile to gameplay. Entity spawner, and now in the level entity system, I will pass in the platformer entity spawner. And in here, so this is going to be recipe, and platform entity spawner, create entity from recipe at, this is X, copy this line here, the same for Y and Z, 1, 2, and the recipe is the second parameter. Okay, so that should work. And just to once again take a look at this, I'm creating a new platform above the current platform that is moving, but saying that I want to, for this component, I want to add this property or modify this property. So let's take a look at this, the result of it. Okay, so we have a platform here which moves diagonally because it moves to the right and 2 blocks to the up. Okay, but so this is very horrible to write here because of the whole escaping of quotes and so on. So what I'd like to do instead is allow also to specify, instead of passing here a string, which is a recipe, as a value, I want to pass an object which has a prefab name, moving platform, and changes which define what should be modified there. So for example, I say that the same gonna be passed here as an actual JSON. So I want this component to have distance x specified, and I have to this and this removed. Okay, so this is much easier to read. So I want to, on this position, I want to create moving platform. And the changes I want to apply it to whatever the moving platform defines here is that this component has actually a distance y set to 2. So let us modify this. So we have to be able to specify to create entity at float x, float y, float z with prefab name and changes. So let me implement this here. So now comes the interesting part. So I could actually do the same. So the entity spawner has a method for entity from prefab and changes. However, the thing we have to figure out that this actually is also changes. So to this recipe that is defined by the prefab here moving platform, we want to add here a location and modify an existing base location if it is there. So I'll use this here. So first of all, I'll copy the map of changes because I don't want to modify the one that is the prefab actually. So that was passed to us. So I'll make a entity definition. I'll use a copy constructor, and then I'll do a map of string to object specifying location params. And I'll say location params put x should be x, y should be y, and z should be z. So this is basically me specifying, simulating a JSON, so saying that in here there's going to be something that has the x, y, and z with its values that are passed here in the parameters. And then I'll say that the definition that has the changes here, I want it to have, first of all, I want to add a location component. So the plus means that I'm adding a new component to this prefab. So this is the changes, has certain syntax saying that I want to add a location component, and the value should be the parameters of it. And I want to, if base location component exists, I want to modify it. So whenever I want to modify, I just say this way. However, if I want to say if it exists, modify it, then I do a question mark at the beginning. That's how the entity spawner works. If you take a look at the code here, it checks them. And so just one more thing, if you specify minus at the beginning here, for example, this, it will remove the components from this. So the changes that are like wrapping the actual prefab is saying that if this component had this location component will be removed. Okay, but we don't want to remove it. We just want to add it. And the value is going to be the same as here. Okay, and then finally I will call entity spawner, spawn entity, specifying prefab name and the entity def, so the changes. And I'll return the result here. And now I want to be able to call it. So in here, I'll make first of all, I want to make at the moment, the level entity, the object coordinates is a map of string to string. However, this means that this would have to be string. This is not a string, this is a map actually. But let's say generalize it because it can be a string or can be a map. So I'll do an object. So the level component will say that the object coordinates are map of string to object. And then in here, I'll say value. And now, if value is an instance of string, I do, okay, let me extract this to be x, because it's going to be the same for both cases, y and z. So if it is a string, I'll do the same what I did before. So I create it from recipe, but I'll make it shorter. There's no point of doing so many here, X, Y, and Z. Otherwise, I'll do a spawner from recipe add X, Y, Z. Sorry, not from recipe, entity add. And I will cast the value to a map. And the name of the prefab is under prefab name, and changes is under changes. So, okay, object map def get prefab name, and changes is object map def get changes. Now I have to make the casts here to string, and here to map string to object. Okay, and here string value. Okay, so now I have the same thing defined, but in a more readable way. Okay, so I have a bug here. Yeah, so it should be plus location here. I must have removed it before. So we want to add a location component. So let me run it again. Okay, and we now seeing that the platform is moving here. Okay, so we are not spawning an entities here directly. We can do the same here. So we will instead. So this is for the blocks here, and they are always going to be prefabs. They're not going to be recipes even. So let me use here the entity platform entity spawner, create entity from recipe. Once again, we'll have XYZ here. That's going to be the same as here. XYZ, and it's going to be prefab name. I want to return it. So the last place when there is an entity spawning in the level entity system is here down here, and so I'll have to add a new method to the spawner to be able to create entity from recipe directly. And there's going to be additional object here. Okay, so I'll add this method to the interface. I'll make it return entity ref, because why not? Recipe. I'll implement it here, which is going to be a simple pass over to the spawner. So another place where we are spawning an entity is in this combat system, where we are spawning the projectiles that are shot by the entities, like the bug with the gun in this case. And how we can modify it is that replace the whole setting if exists facing if exists kinetic to set values. We can instead just change the attack projectile component to return a map of string to object. Similarly, like we did for the level component, and then so we'll have here attack projectile get. So let's rename this. It's going to be projectile recipe, and in here projectile recipe. And so we'll get the get prefab name. This is all very similar to what we had before. Prefab name and changes. So we don't need this anymore. So to the changes, we have to add the location component, but we don't have to because this is going to be what is going to be done by the platformer spawner. It's taking care of the location. So instead, we'll have here X, Y, Z. So anyway, and in the end, what we want to achieve is that projectile is, let me inject the platformer entity spawner. Platformer entity spawner, create entity at X, Y, Z. I'll move these up. Our end result what we want to have. Distance X is not modified, not defined yet, but I'll move it in a moment. Prefab name is prefab name, and changes it changes. So this is our result, entity ref projectile, and we don't need this. And so this has to move here. So the changes we want to apply that are that if the projectile definition has the, once again, has the facing direction component, then we want to put the direction being an entity direction. Okay, so let me do collections singleton collections singleton. Oh no, maybe I'll just make a proper direction values. Direction values, put direction as the name of the property, and it's going to be entity direction values. Okay, so these three lines is basically a sort of substitute of these lines, basically saying that if the projectile has the facing direction component, then you have to set the direction property to be whatever the entity direction contains. So these replace it. And how we replace this, we want also always, so we always assume that it has the kinetic object component. No, we also don't assume. So if it has kinetic object component, so once again, put kinetic object component, kinetic values, and we'll have a map here, kinetic values, and we want to set the property velocity x to be projectile speed. Okay, we don't need this anymore. Okay, I think that should be it. Finally, I have to modify the prefab for the bug with gun. So first of all, change the property name to projectile recipe. And second of all, this has to be a map. So we'll have prefab name being bug projectile and changes being an empty map. Okay, in here we can also use it. So this is for spawning the star above the block. So let me add a platformer entity spawner here, and for the platform entity spawner, create entity from recipe at. This is X position, this is Y position, and Z position. And finally, the spawn entity get prefab name. Okay, and we don't need the return, so this is no longer needed. We have to remove the component. Okay, I think that's it here. Okay, so let me run it. I'll just enable all these levels. So we just to make sure that I didn't break anything. Okay, transform entity spawner. Gameplay and spawn entity system is probably not specified. Yeah, not specified. It's only gameplay, so it was created in menu as well. Context, and the menu context didn't have this one. Okay, so let's run it again. Okay, level 1, level 2, level 3. Let's start spawning correctly. Level 4, enemy is there. Oh, I died. This one should shoot. Yes, awesome. And finally, we have these two platforms here. This platform above is blocking as it's supposed to. Okay, so everything is working. That's it for this episode. Make sure to like it and subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on Twitter. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching. Bye.